So my name is Chris Kukulski. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I'm your city administrator. We've got several individuals who are going to speak. Our purpose today for this meeting is to provide a brief description of the challenges we're having in public safety here in our community. We want to share our strategies to solve those, and most importantly, we want to receive feedback from you. Right out of the gate, a young lady in the audience asked me here, who was our first attendee, how are you defining public safety? Well, I would say in part, we're defining it in the goals that the council has set up. I believe we have a crime problem. If you look at our crime statistics, crime rates have gone up at too high a pace. So our commitment here and our strategies are to reduce crime and to reduce property damage and loss of life or injury through emergency services. That's predominantly police, fire, or I'm sorry, fire and EMS, and on the crime side, it's our criminal justice system. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our police chief, who's going to kick us off.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come and hear this. Rich St. John, the Chief of Police here. I'm going to start year 40 in March, so been there, done that, seen a lot of stuff, and very excited to present this information for you. As Chris indicated, the criminal activity here is certainly people are no stranger to hearing about it and seeing some of the things that are going on. And what is reflected here is a trend both in our population, starting back in 2006 up into 2018, where we're around 110,000 is what the number that we're working with. And that would be the red line. You can see that it is gradually increasing. We don't have any big spikes. We don't have any big dips. And I think that is probably pretty conducive to good growth for our city. The line below that would be our calls for service. This would be when people pick up the phone and ask for help. You can see that starting in 2006 up to 2011, relatively flat. And then we start spiking and heading up until 2018, when we topped out with 93,300 plus calls for service. In 2011 is when we started really feeling the effects of our methamphetamine problem, and that's another lunch discussion that we won't go into now, but obviously lots to work with there. I will tell you that early numbers for completion of 2019 is we have 94,700 calls for service. So we went up a little bit from last year. This slide here really identifies the situation that we're dealing with. And this talks about our call load. There are many formulas on police staffing, and what we're looking at here is that in 2018, on an average, 24/7, 365, the police department handled 10 calls an hour. 24/7, 365, obviously that's just an average. On a minimum staffing day, this is the least that we'll go to work with, and there's a little bit more than that, some dynamics. We go to work with 9 officers. And so with 9 officers, we are saturated and can't handle any more calls at 6. And that means everybody else, those other people, are waiting for a response. It will take 16 officers to handle those 10 calls an hour with nobody waiting in the queue. That's just handling the calls. That does nothing for proactive patrol, which is where we want to be. So you can see a significant increase in staffing would be in order there. Our data summarized here. We break things down to what's called Part 1, Part 2 crimes. These are things that the FBI has us reporting. Part 1 crimes are generally serious crimes against people. They include homicide, aggravated assault, rape, robbery. And Part 2 crimes would be those are property crimes. They're burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and arson. So you can see in 2018, violent crime, 663 of our citizens were victimized. Property crime, 5692. And the years, you can see how they ebb and flow. As we compare that to some peer cities and our sister cities and apply that to a crime rate per 100,000, for our violent crime at 602, and for our property crime, 5174. And what that is telling us is that Of 100,000 people, 602 will be a victim or were a victim in 2018 of some sort of violent crime, which I identified earlier. This is unacceptable, and one of our goals is to drive those numbers down, and always has been and will continue into the future. Same correlation as we see the property crimes. So what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do about it based on whatever the citizens decide to give us? First of all, number one strategy, we're going to attack violent crime. And we're going to do so by bolstering our specialized positions, which are basically units that are proactive in nature. They're not tied to the radio. They go out and get in the middle of stuff, and they make a significant difference. You can see on the bullet points that these are the targeted areas that we're going to get after. In 2018, we made a significant impact in street-level crime with the creation of one such unit, and we'd like to augment that. Second priority is to improve the downtown safety. I think everybody's well aware of the concerns, be it real, be it perception, of the downtown situation. Again, we want to increase presence. We want to use our analytical ability to drill down on where we're having issues, and then take advantage of our cooperation with businesses down there, and this crime prevention through environmental design program. Again, another partner to help businesses help themselves to stop from being victimized. Improve traffic safety, that goes without saying. I think the citizens of Billings are well aware of what great drivers everybody are around here. That's the number one complaint I hear, regardless which task force I go to. Again, we want to augment our ability to enforce. So DUI, hit those hot spots and be able to better deal with citizen concerns. Expand the presence on the week and on the hours of the day. So again, enhance that ability. And then again, we know that we are heavily troubled with mental illness and addiction issues. And what we'd like to do is to support those social agencies that can help us handle some of these issues which are spinning off and causing us problems in other areas. That concludes my presentation. I'll turn it over now to Wyeth Friday. He is your planning and director, or community director.
All right, thank you, Chief. I'm just going to give you a little rundown here on our code enforcement division. And code enforcement in Billings is all about preserving and protecting and enhancing Billings neighborhoods through enforcement of a variety of codes. Our small division enforces 22 different parts of the city code in the community, and some of the examples of those types of codes are junk vehicles, unsecured structures, whether that's commercial or residential, where we have built, doors, windows open, accessibility to those structures is occurring, and nuisance weeds during the summer across the whole city, which can be a fire issue and also a quality of life issue as well. And also parking, different types of parking violations. So those are just a few of the 22 codes that we enforce in this division. The chart here is just showing you from the last 12 years our caseloads that we've seen. We're now, and then you can see 17, 18, we're now well over 6,000 cases per year. We have 5.5 staff in our division currently with 4 code enforcement officers, and so we're looking at about 8 new cases per officer per day that are coming into through our division. We are complaint driven, so we are responding to complaints that are coming into our office for the most part, whether it's electronically, phone, or people walking into the office. So we're getting that many cases flowing in on a complaint-driven basis. Just a few photos. If you see what we're trying to go here, the top 2 photos are commercial property. We're trying to go from the left to the right there, and you can see the outcome of cleaning that property up. And then on the bottom is a residential property where we went again from left to right, getting that property cleaned up. The real challenge with a lot of this is that depending on when we find out and receive a complaint on some of these properties, they're already have a lot of issues going on, a lot of things in these cases, a lot of junk and trash and such on the property, and so that often then makes it a lot takes a lot longer for us to get that property dealt with. Sometimes there's a variety of issues even by then with ownership and who's responsible. And so that's a challenge that we face with some of these where they're already in pretty rough shape. I do want to stress that we work very hard with the property owners to resolve the issues instead of going right into a law enforcement, a violation situation and going to court. We really pride ourselves on that. We work extensively with property owners of all types to try and work with them to get their property cleaned up and get it addressed in that manner instead of having to go into a court situation. However, in some cases, that is where we end up. In terms of our future strategies to move forward, if we were able to access additional resources for code enforcement, moving to more active compliance, which really we're talking about being more proactive in the community. If we were able to be out and catching up with some of these properties early when things are just starting to, issues are just starting to occur, that gives us a much better chance of resolving it more quickly and also not having us get into a much longer process depending on what's happening with the property, with the ownership, and things like that. Also, just in terms of reducing future crimes, it's really important to recognize, because we work a lot with the police department and law enforcement in this area, is if we can deal with some of these properties early when we're just dealing with maybe some junk vehicles or some property damage things, some unsecured structure issues. If we can do that early, that then gets addressed, and we don't then have it roll into a situation where we start having calls for service because we have crime activity going on those properties as well. So that's a really big deal in terms of how that can work hand in hand if we're able to be out there more proactive. Successful compliance, again, working, and you're going to hear from our city attorney here in a few moments, but working with our legal staff as we go through the court process when we have to do that with some of our cases. Having that additional help in the future would be significant in terms of making those cases move more smoothly, having that guidance and support from legal, and being able to move those along as we deal with those more complicated cases. And then education and outreach. The more we can get out in the community and talk to the task forces, talk to service groups, explain to them what it is we're doing, what the different types of city ordinances that are being addressed are, so they understand then when they see something going on in their neighborhood, they know, okay, this is something that, this is a code enforcement issue, or this is something that I know how to respond or how to ask for help on this. That's great, because that helps us then move things more quickly, and the community then also understands how to respond and how to provide information to us when those issues come up. So with that, I'm going to have our city attorney, Brent Brooks, is going to come up and talk to you about the legal side. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us very briefly, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you a little bit today. I'm a little hoarse from recovering from a cold, so sorry about that. Our slides presentation here today is very brief, but the first slide, I think the take-home lesson here is that our office is reactive. The cases come to us primarily from the Billings Police Department or code enforcement, and anytime you add even one police officer, there's going to be generated about 60 misdemeanor cases. So there is, as you can see, a interrelationship between the Billings Police Department officers that are writing citations and making misdemeanor arrests, code enforcement, as Mr. Friday had just explained to you, and then our office. And these are some of the challenges that our office faces, and I'll show you here in just a minute the next slide. It kind of emphasizes that in a statistical way. But these are some of the challenges again, and I think the important thing to take home from this slide is the interrelationship between law enforcement, code enforcement, and our office. The ABA, or American Bar Association, has some best practice informal standards that it has established over the years for both prosecutors and defense attorneys. And this slide represents a comparison of those best practices to the current city attorney Billings caseloads for both domestic violence, that's what DV stands for, domestic violence cases, and non-domestic violence cases. As you can see, particularly with the non-domestic violence cases, we're about 3 times plus what the ABA recommends for a per prosecutor per year caseload. And this is something that has increased over the years. It isn't something sudden, but you can see just using even just the last 3 years, this is something that just cannot be sustained with the current staffing level of prosecutors in our office. what are we going to do to try to alleviate some of the challenges and to meet those challenges in cooperation with the Billings Police Department, Code Enforcement, and to a lesser extent the Fire Department? Well, these are some of the strategies that we've identified in our office. Of course, the most important thing is to add additional people to handle the additional caseload that will be generated by new Billings Police Department officers, but to also reduce what the burden is that you saw in the previous slide. It isn't as if you're starting kind of with an even playing field and you're anticipating what may happen in the future. We're already behind the curve in terms of handling the cases that come to our office through misdemeanors. The other thing that I want to emphasize that was mentioned in the first of our 3 slides is there are at least some misdemeanors that are very critical that we catch and rehabilitate people if we can before they graduate to felonies. And some of those are domestic violence cases, DUI cases, because when they reach their 3rd and 4th conviction, and now that the next offense is going to be in district court as a felony. So this impacts district court as well in a very real way, and I just wanted to emphasize that. It isn't some kind of analysis in a vacuum. We're looking at the entire criminal justice system here. The main thing to also emphasize in terms of adding staff is our office has not added any prosecutors since 2007, and obviously we've had over a 50% increase in the caseloads per prosecutor. I think another important thing to do is to continue to collaborate with folks like you in some of your organizations, the Retail Crime Association, some of the big box stores, some of the local stores like Shields, Shipton's, et cetera, have been very helpful in maintaining relationships with the police department and our office. The Downtown Business Improvement District and the Downtown Partnership, and of course your various neighborhood task forces, which I know many of you are members of. It's very important that we continue to talk, and you may have some great ideas that we have not thought of. So I just wanted to emphasize that. So this gives our strategies, the problems, and then a statistical snapshot of where we're at right now. And I'll turn this over to Chief Bill Rash.
Well, my name is Bill Rash. I'm the Fire Chief of the Billings Fire Department, and I too would like to thank everybody for coming out and joining us today. This is a very important issue, and we're very anxious to hear your input. I'd like to start off with the Billings Fire Department and our problem statement. The Billings Fire Department does not meet the national standard for fire stations and staffing, and that results in almost twice the national average for travel time to emergencies. That's our business, getting there fast and being effective. Speaking about the time and how important our response time is, I'd like to go right into something, a little bit of a video here that you can look at that might help better illustrate what our needs are and the basis for why our response time is so important. So we'll go ahead and we'll present it.
You may have heard about NFPA 1710, the industry standard for career fire departments. But what is it? And what does it mean for our community? Your house is on fire. It's your worst nightmare. In just 3 minutes, a fire can grow 16 times larger than when it started. And it continues to grow bigger and faster every second. Once the clock starts ticking, there's a shrinking window of opportunity to save lives and property. You want a full crew of firefighters to put it out quickly, or you may suffer a catastrophic loss. But how many are enough? 50, 20, 40? How do you decide? Fortunately, there's an internationally recognized industry standard. It's called NFPA 1710, and it's based on scientific evidence and research that establishes how many firefighters are needed to put out each fire and rescue anyone trapped. At a fire scene, you want a firefighter doing every job that needs to be done to save you and your house. And at a fire, there's a lot that needs to be done, like stretching the hose, hooking to a hydrant, searching for trapped people, venting the hot gases, and much more. For a low-hazard single-family house fire, NFPA 1710 specifies a minimum of 15 firefighters dispatched in the initial alarm. At an open-air strip shopping center or garden apartment fire, the standard specifies a minimum of 28 firefighters dispatched in the first alarm. And for fires in high-rise buildings at least 7 stories tall, the data show that the initial dispatch should be for a minimum of 43 firefighters, and that fire departments should send additional firefighters to situations that are beyond the capability of the initial alarm. When considering crew size on each engine and truck responding to a fire, the standard says that in low-hazard response areas like residential neighborhoods, the required number of firefighters on each fire engine and truck is 4. In areas with a high number of incidents or geographic restrictions like narrow roads, single-access bridges, or islands, a minimum of 5 firefighters on each fire engine and ladder truck is required. And in dense urban areas with high hazard occupancies like high-rise buildings, the minimum number of firefighters on each fire engine or truck is 6. Regardless of the type of property, 1710 also sets the time of arrival on scene within 4 minutes for the first engine with 4 firefighters. The 1710 standard for both response time and crew size is based on scientific evidence, not opinion. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, known as NIST, and its partners conducted extensive research to document the optimal crew sizes for various types of structures. As a decision maker, you and firefighters share a common goal. Everyone gets out alive. So when a house is on fire, just remember, it takes a minimum of 15 firefighters to put it out. And the responding crews should have the right number of firefighters on each engine and truck. The quicker the response time, the better the outcome for everyone. For more information, talk to your local firefighters. Thanks for listening, and stay safe.
This next video we're going to have is going to be quite impactful, and what we want to demonstrate here is that the legacy room is pretty much the type of combustibles that we used to deal with like 30 years ago. We're talking about cotton products, wood products, things that didn't burn fast and hot. Today's what we call a modern room, these are combustibles. These are petroleum-based combustible products, or plastics, things like this that burn much faster, much hotter. You can already see that there's a fire started at the same time, legacy room, modern room. This is something that we strive to get there within the time to be able to effectively be able to get in there and knock this fire down and contain it to within the room and contents. That is very challenging in this day and age, and why we have to be there quicker so that it doesn't extend on to other areas of the structure, endangering life and property. With that being said, again, look at the comparison. Note when the actual flashover time, where it actually begins extending to the rest of the structure. Time to flash over with the modern day combustible petroleum-based products, 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Now, if you continue to watch the legacy room of what we've dealt with in the past, and what this has evolved into with the modern room, you will see now, very, very shortly, that we are dealing with a flashover time of 29 minutes and 25 seconds. So that's very indicative of why, over the 30, 40 years that we've been involved in the fire service, why we have to get there quicker to be effective, save lives, reduce property loss. Our strategies to reduce loss of life and property are reducing our dispatch call time between the 911 and public safety resources. Reduce turnout time for firefighters in leaving our fire stations. We need to add personnel to increase efficiency for fire rescue operations. As you can see from the photographs here, these are all Billings firefighters involved in this. Many different disciplines that we are involved in: rescues, EMS, technical rescues. These are things that we are tasked with the Billings Fire Department on a daily basis. We need to improve our facilities. We need to address our deferred maintenance so that we can make sure that our investment in our infrastructure is adequate. We have a need to add Fire Station 8 in the Heights with equipment and firefighters. We need to reduce response times to emergencies, again, our goal. This will be a little bit, hopefully a little more, explain a little better where we're looking at with Station 8. If you look at all of the red dots here, you will see them numbered. Now those indicate the 7 fire stations located within the city of Billings. So if you take, for example, Station 6, now keeping in mind that each and every one of these fire stations very well could be out on a call, training, motor pool. You never know if they're for certain that they're in their quarters. You take, for example, Station 6, and you remove that through either a call, going to a training, going to motor pool, you have left this open, which will have an impact on the rest of the city because it's a domino effect. It begins that domino effect. You get calls up there without a second station, you are then drawing resources from the downtown area up to the heights to cover that, to properly service our 30,000 plus residents in that area. That's a substantial concern of ours. Now, with the addition of Station 8 in approximately this area, you would have less of an impact on drawing other resources out of the other areas of the city, thus affecting, not affecting the response times that we would be affecting today in trying to cover Station 6. And in conclusion, basically what you'll see here is an upward trajectory of the calls for service for various means. You will see in 2018, 15,550 calls, and we know now that we are well into the 16,000 calls with our 2019 statistics. So with that, I would like to turn this back over to City Administrator Chris Mikulski.
Thanks, Chief. Sorry. So in addition to dealing with implementing the strategies we've talked about so far, unfortunately, we've got a structural imbalance financially. So prior city administration had been pointing out for several years that at some point the city was going to find that its operational expenses, when I say structural imbalance, I mean our day-to-day operational expenses going beyond what our revenue is annually. So I'd separate that from capital investments, right? One time, the mortgage, the car versus day-to-day operations. We had made some changes, unfortunately lost about $2.5 million in revenue 2 years ago. That used to be through a franchise fee on all of our utilities. So that revenue source went away. That was a significant part of this dip in revenue. And then additionally, we worked really hard to remain fully staffed. We customarily were seeing 7 figures in vacancy savings in our public safety areas just due to turnover. And now we're pushing really hard not to see vacancy savings, but to stay fully staffed. So those two are a pretty significant part of this swing. First and foremost, before we ask for additional resources, we need to make sure we're running as efficiently as we can. So we're just beginning the process of Lean Six Sigma and continuing improvement process. We're going through that analysis as an organization. The consultant's going to be doing that over the next 3 months. Interviews actually start next week on that. And our point there, and not that it hasn't been going on in the past, I think it has, but a very deliberate process to analyze our systems. And last but certainly not least, though unfortunately in Montana, property taxes are our primary revenue source. I've for 21 years been trying to find ways for us to deal with something other than property owners having to pay for everything. That's not what the law allows. But we do have other areas we can look into. So we are analyzing the value and what resources may be able to come in through impact fees so that growth would be covering some share of the capital investments. We're looking at the equity of what we charge to the BUFSA. The BUFSA is the region outside the city limits that our fire department provides fire services to. It more than doubles the size of the city. The city's 42 square miles. The BUFSA alone is about 47 square miles. So our fire department's covering essentially 100 square mile radius, and we want to make sure that our fees there are fair and equitable to both. We want to look at potentially increasing municipal fines. Today, those fines for a traffic infraction, standard infraction, between the fees and the add-ons, about $110 per fee or per ticket. Those haven't been changed in several years. We're looking at that. We're also looking at the potential of a public safety district relative to some of our users who don't pay property taxes, and then charges for service. Now, you know, I don't see us charging for service for every call that someone makes, but one of those areas we get a lot of false alarms. There are other areas, so we want to turn over all those rocks and make sure that we're not only looking to the property tax and the public safety levy as an additional revenue source. So, as I said when we started this discussion, our purpose today, we wanted to provide you with a crudely brief description of the problem. We wanted to share our strategies for tackling those challenges, and then frankly and most importantly, we want to hear from you and get feedback from you. And that's where we're at. So if, as I said earlier, we've got some questions that might help tee up the conversation, but by no means do I want to think we're limited to those questions that are in front of you. But I thought those might help guide us to kind of get out of the gate. Everyone here on our staff who you heard present is here, along with myself, to answer questions. So with that, why don't we dive into some questions that you guys have, and if that fades off, which I doubt, I'm going to go to the sheet to what questions are there, and anyone who feels compelled to write anything on those sheets and leave them behind for us, whether you want to sign them or not, we appreciate the feedback. So thank you, and Tom.
Hi, my name is Tom Zergulin. For those of you who haven't met me before, good crowd. First of all, I understand all your charts with the growth of the city and the increased calls for service. I'm not immune to that. But I don't understand your strategies for solution. First off, the chief said he was going to go after downtown, to clean up downtown. Well, we did that a few years ago. The Downtown Business Association hired policemen to put on bicycles. All of a sudden, we had vagrants clear out in the Heights at Albertsons. That's a significant distance from the core downtown. If we're going to go after downtown, are we going to clean it up, or are we going to move the problem all over the city? I don't see anything in your strategies to address that. Then there's other problems I see. Can everybody hear me? Or? Wyeth Friday showed us some beautiful pictures of code enforcement. The commercial property, 2 different pictures. I couldn't tell if it was the same property. The dirty picture shows cement, some power lines. The clean picture does not show any of that. Are they truly the same property? How do we know? The residential property, as you see on the left, there's lots of trees by the house. There looks like a sliding back door in the house. It's a turquoise house on the right. Where's the trees? Where's the sliding back door? Is that truly the same house? We need facts. We just don't need this, take our word for it. We need to see how these things are going.
So Tom, why don't you give us a chance to answer? I want to have the chief address your first kind of line of questions. And then secondly, I'm confident, and Wyatt's going to tell me here, just because they're not standing in the exact same location when they took these photos, that it is the same property. If these are not the same properties and I'm standing in front of you implying that they are the same property, then I don't have any credibility, and we don't. And I'm not expecting you to just trust us, but my apology that our staff didn't stand in this precise location and get the same photo. Chief, can you help me? No, not on that one, on the first crime question.
Yeah, certainly. So again, our task today was to generally put out what our overall strategy was, not to get into the details of this thing. I will tell you that in 2015, I believe there was a survey that went out, and unequivocally, of all the questions that were asked of the citizens of Billings, the number one concern they had was that people felt unsafe or uneasy in downtown after hours. More so than during the daytime, more so than in their neighborhoods, and more so than being a victim of a violent crime. So that tells me that we've got an issue downtown to deal with. Now, the program that Tom referenced a while back was very successful, and we anticipated that it would displace the problem from downtown to other parts of the city, and it did. And we've extended our enforcement actions out to those areas. It's not as focused as it is in the downtown area. And so that, again, with the staffing available, where we're not just answering calls for service, it gives us the ability to proactively deal with those situations, whether it's the panhandling that's moved out east or west. But the other thing we need to keep in mind is that, you know, when I went to cop school, this isn't our deal. We fight crime. We enforce the law. But we have become all things social. And so this is why this is such a critical thing. If we can get hooked in with our partners, and we got great relations and great programs going right now to collaborate to deal with some of these things, regardless of where it's at, whether it's downtown or whether it's the rest of the town. Understand the limitations, Tom, I know you do. It's not illegal to be homeless, not illegal to be intoxicated in public. All right, well, there's a wide variety of things that kind of hamstring on this, and it's not that we're not picking on homeless people, but we are going to get after vagrancy, and that's a whole different thing than homelessness. And so that's a focus of all the discussions that we had. I hope that answered your question.
And another question, yeah.
I'd just like to address one of the questions you had. You indicated that you weren't sure that was the same house in the code enforcement pictures. I am a neighbor in that neighborhood, and I spent an extensive amount of time in that backyard. And I can say with absolute certainty that was the same backyard, because I recognize a lot of things in those pictures. So I'm not part of the police department or anything, not part of code enforcement, but I'm positive that's the same house.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
It's more of a statement. When you say problem, I'd love to hear you say people, and you just did. The problem, we're dealing with our human beings.
Absolutely.
They are a part of us. And to make them an enemy, we don't know where they came from. And know the history, but do not make them the enemy.
Sure.
And then another thing, you said you're trying to find out where the fires are, and many of the calls are false. Have you used drones?
I don't know that we've had any use of drones in tracking, and I'm quite certain we've not used drones as a mechanism for tracking calls. We are analyzing the call data and segregating out and trying to understand the types of calls, because on both sides of these public safety discussions, the type of call matters. Not all calls are the same. Not all calls require the same level of service in the same way that you saw from our prosecutors. I'm sure no one in this room would argue with how sad it is that we're dealing with over 800 domestic violence cases, 800 new domestic violence cases a year. A domestic violence case typically is significantly more time consuming, and more effort needs to go into resolving that, dealing with that, prosecuting that, than some of our other call types. So, yes, sir.
First, I want to thank the police for being there for us and doing their best to protect us. Kudos to you guys. But my thing is about the dispatchers. About how well are these guys trained? There was an incident at my place. We only live a couple blocks from downtown. And I was going to leave the house to pick up my wife from work. And it was night, probably about 10 o'clock. And I went outside, and here there was a guy trying to break into my vehicle. Well, my first thought was, when he saw me, he ducked down to hide. My first thought was to jump on him and do a tap dance all over him. But I thought I would do the law thing and go inside and call the police. So I called the police, and dispatcher answered, "What is your emergency?" I gave my name and address. I said, "I need you to send the police right away. There's somebody breaking into my vehicle." And then I had to play 20 questions. What does he look like? How tall is he? I couldn't tell because it was dark out. I couldn't tell how tall he was because he ducked down, was laying down. But after every question I answered, I said, "Send the police, send the police." At the end of the 20 questions, the ambulance is on their way. And I said, I don't want an ambulance, I need the police. Well, so by the time I got outside, I could hear the sirens. I ran outside, here's the fire department and the ambulance, and the guy is long gone by now. Now, you know, I know that the police are undermanned, and you know, when seconds count, the police are 15, 20 minutes away. Even if you live as close as I do downtown, it takes a while for them to get there, because, you know, they're undermanned, they're spread out all over. But my beef isn't with the police, it's with dispatchers. You know, because I made it very clear to that dispatcher from the very beginning, I need the police, you know, and I got an ambulance. So,
sir, I don't want to necessarily respond to your specific call, but Chief Rash, who oversees our 911 dispatch center, as you saw in some of our comments, I mean, that's where the call comes in. So if you could speak to, you know, what we do for training and how maybe calls generally are handled as they're bringing in information while they've already dispatched somebody or whatnot. So, Chief?
Certainly. To help try to address that issue, and we do have our communications center supervisor, manager here in attendance too. But I will tell you that a lot of times when these calls come in, that there's an immediate dispatch for the emergency response units. So after they have made that initial immediate dispatch, then what they do is they are trained to begin fact-finding, information gathering. So one, is this more than what we're just seeing? Is this more of a, is there medical involved? Is it, what's happening? How is the situation evolving? They have the units on the way, but they are also monitoring what's going on so that they can update the responding units so we can be more efficient and have the proper resources delivered to that scene, depending on this. I do not know, sir, exactly what your situation was. I don't know, and this happens quite often too, and I think Diane Guy, our communication center manager, would agree with this. We also, on many, many calls, get additional phone calls that have additional information or maybe even contrary information, and we choose to respond with everything we have based on the information, whatever source or sources we're getting it from, so that we have the proper resources to address and protect our citizens.
well, I made it very clear from the very beginning what the situation was. My vehicle was being broken into, and the response time of the fire department was excellent. The police never ever did come, not even to take a report. They never came. I saw two officers drive by, but they never stopped. You know?
If this was a break-in situation, I would be able to stand here and tell you in confidence that the police department was notified. There was more than likely a staffing shortage there, but there may have been other information from other neighbors that saw things, that saw it from a different perspective. I'm not trying to make excuses, sir. I'm just telling you what our folks in the 911 center have to deal with, and that's a number of calls and different information, and we have to try to address all of those for the safety of our citizens as well as our responders. So I'm sorry if that doesn't completely answer your question.
Yes, ma'am.
Carrie Boyer with the Mental Health Center. I know that Chief St. John said the number one concern in that survey was about safety after hours in downtown. And we own and operate the hub, and I believe that that's one reason why there isn't as many safety issues during the daytime.
Because we are helping defer some of those issues at the hub by treating folks there inside the building, not folks that you see outside of the building. But my question is, as the city is looking at investing into mental health services and addiction, at the same time, about an hour from now, the county is talking about issuing us a letter that requires us to move our building from downtown Billings. And so I'm wondering what kind of collaboration is happening between the city and the county to make sure that the city isn't actually backfilling a hole being created by the county at its meeting later this afternoon.
As far as specifically the county's action, I mean, we are in kind of constant dialogue. I've met with County Commissioner Pittman a number of times, our chief and sheriff and others in law enforcement talk, but we've not been asked and we've not weighed in specifically on what it is that they're doing with the location of the hub.
I'm Larry Seekins. First off, let me tell you, I've got the highest respect for our two chiefs here. I think they're excellent people, and I also think we have got an outstanding police and fire department. But I do have some concerns. The first concern that I have is a while back, a month or so ago, Q2 put on television that Billings is the least safe city in Montana. How many of you heard that? Well, I'm a recovering engineer and I don't believe anything that people say until I check it out myself. And so I did. I went into the FBI database and I discovered that the information that they had was between 750 to 1,000% erroneous. I then got the numbers. And any guesses as to what the least safe city in Montana really is? What is it?
Great Falls?
Bingo! How'd you know that? I found that Great Falls had a violent crime and property crime rate that was 18% higher than Billings. Next was Helena. They were 13% higher, and Butte was next at 9% higher. We are 2% above Missoula. Billings is not the least safe city in Montana. In fact, I think Q2 should apologize to Chief St. John and the police department. That's irresponsible to say that. I did some more figuring, and I discovered that these two crime rates actually went down 10% last year because of the work that our chief and the police department has been working on. I think they should be commended for the job that we're doing. I mean, the things that are happening to us now are dramatic. We're kind of a dumping ground for a lot of the other places here, and they've got to deal with that. And then the chief has got to deal with all these other problems that the police department cannot solve. We're talking about broken families. We're talking about drug abuse. We're talking about alcohol problems. We're talking about mental health illnesses. They're not designed to do that. The chief just said, what are they there for? Law enforcement. So I think these guys, they need some help. But let's get rid of all this other stuff that's trying to make this an emotional issue. Now, let me talk a little bit about our fire department. Incidentally, I met with the two chiefs yesterday and we talked about this.
And if I could not be rude to you as a citizen,
Go
but
ahead.
please recognize we've got about 50 people here, others who may want to make comments and
All right.
ask questions.
I won't talk about the chief,
And
but I
no,
do have
you're
one
welcome
problem.
to, but I just asked you to keep it brief,
That's
and then I
fine.
would like to find out what the discrepancy is later between yours and ours, because I'm using numbers here that are also
I'll
from
be
the
glad to
FBI
help you.
statistics.
It's not my numbers, it's the FBI's.
And that's what these are as well.
That'll be interesting to see. One final thing. Why am I concerned? I mean, I support the things that they want to do, but our public safety budget this last 3 years went up around 24%. If we go with the latest numbers that I saw projected, in the next 5 years, it will increase 103%. That's my major concern. What we got to do is figure out how do we solve these problems, and I appreciated the ways that you were talking about, in such a way that we're not going to cause our public to deny any sort of a levy. All right.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Okay.
My name is Jennifer Owen. I want to kind of pick up on some of those threads from Larry. I appreciate incredibly the work that our police and fire and our legal systems are doing, but I'm really concerned, just to be candid, at the lack of a really comprehensive prevention strategy. And I know you're time constrained, so you can't get into the details of everything, but Chief St. John is right. I mean, we're asking our police and fire to be social workers, and they're not. And I don't yet see the robustness of conversation around crime prevention. I see strong conversation and plans around crime response and crime reduction, preventing repeat offenders. Those are important and worthy goals. But we're not doing enough on crime prevention. And I really want to leave you with the idea that government cannot and should not do crime prevention. There are nonprofits, there are churches, there are private sector entities who should be engaged systematically to work on crime prevention, and I don't see the robustness of that dialogue happening. In fact, I see a suggestion buried in here that you might tax those same nonprofits because they don't pay property tax. And so you're going to take the people who can do low-cost prevention in a nimble, efficient, and private sector way and tax them to put more money into the government to respond to what we could have prevented. And that's a circular sort of silliness that I would hope we can be more strategic in avoiding.
Thank you. Bruce.
Yeah, just a couple of questions, one for each of the chiefs. Chief St. John, I see what you presented looked like a lot of the things that the police department's already doing. What are you considering doing that's new or different, or some other ways to, I guess, enhance your services besides just having police officers and then conducting programs that you, I think, have in the past? Now, the question for Chief Rash is a lot of material information on fire calls. 3/4 or more calls are EMS calls. I didn't see much information presented up there. Where do we stand? What are you planning on doing to improve that? Those sorts of things.
Thank you for the questions, Bruce. From the police department standpoint, you're pretty accurate on what it is we are planning to do. A lot of these things are underway right now, but we need to enhance them. The most effective units that we have only work 10 hours a day and 4 days a week because we work 4 10s. So we're missing a good part of the day and a good part of the week. We could be so much more effective on the things that have been identified to us or was problematic, these violent crimes, the robberies, the assaults and all that type of stuff has been identified as pretty serious. So we want to enhance those. The creativity part, I think, comes to our collaborations with our public partners, or I should say private partners, specifically in the downtown area. We're working on expanding the downtown bike program, if you will, to other parts, and then collaborating with other businesses to do just what you were saying, is let's get these people leveraged into treatment. We can't arrest our way out of it, you know that, Bruce. And so we need to do stuff to get leveraged in there, and that's where the creativity will. But right now, we don't have enough staff to get creative because they are relegated to answering calls for service. 94,700 last year. Your police department's busy. Your police department's busy on doing stuff, and they do a great job with some pretty horrendous crimes, and then all the little ticky-tack stuff that really irritate people too. And so that's where the creativity goes, and that also rolls into this. And you remember in your time, Bruce, we were working very hard with the MAP program. We were coordinating with everybody downtown, and we want to, not that it's our bailiwick, but it is what it is. And we're willing to help with that, but we need to have the resources to do that. That's where I find that we get creative and doing things that are outside of the box to help with these issues. Hope that answered your question.
Chief Rash.
Chief?
Well, thank you, Bruce. I appreciate the questions too. First off, when we're talking about our EMS calls, that's approximately 80% if you're including our rescue, extrication, car crashes, things like that. But we do have a high percentage of EMS calls. So that's why you probably will see on a couple engines that we have now recently procured as actually represented as Billings Fire Rescue. That's we feel that's a little more representative of what the fire service has evolved into since what we began in 1978. So AMR, one of our private transport partners, and the Billings Fire Department, and this has been ongoing for quite some time, we've been working collectively to try to come up with different ways to share resources, to, if you will, reimburse, cost recoveries, ways that we can be efficient, more efficient with the city. Everything we're trying to do and have been doing and things that are in process are dealing with how to be more efficient. Lean Six Sigma will be another fresh set of eyes to help us with that. I would also say that we look at our false alarms. Yes, that's a high number when you look at our statistics. We have an issue there. We have a challenge there. We currently have, we've talked about this, we currently have a draft that has yet to be presented because we too have staffing challenges, as most people do. But we do have an actual draft on that we will be presenting to city administration, city council, that will actually address, potentially, if approved, that, okay, we'll go on this false alarm, and number 2 is gonna cost some money, number 3 might cost some money, as a way as to not to deter them from calling us if there's a need or an automatic system, but more so to make sure their systems are operating properly, and that there's a penalty or an incentive, I'll say, to be able to be more efficient. Thus, that should bring some of our calls, our responses down. We have many other things that we have accomplished within the fire department and continue to work on, our training programs, in an effort to try to keep our fire trucks and apparatus in the fire stations within the areas of all of our neighborhoods. We have a video system that's been implemented. Our morning briefings take place on that, as to keep people in the fire stations. We are continuing to evolve into a more efficient way of delivering our training into each station by our video conferencing, so that we don't have to take people out of the stations. We are just at the beginning of the year, our training division, Chief Hoppel have put together a program that we're actually doing a lot of these skills that we can do within the station. We have a demonstration video. Here's what the captain facilitates. We can train within the station. Outside training is always necessary, but we consistently work on trying to improve our efficiency. On 911 Center, same thing. They're part of our organization. We work together. We collaborate on how we can better serve our public. They have a robust training system. They are continually, even though there's staffing shortages there in terms of recruitment, which if anybody has any interest, speak to Diane on your way out. She has a card for you for recruitment if you'd like a nice job. So those are the many things, and I don't know if I'm answering all your questions or if you have another one, Bruce, but there's many things we are working on, policies, procedures, things to be more efficient. These are things that we are working on, and they just take some time, and obviously we have the resource issues as well.
Yes.
Senator Martin McDonald, my district is south, kind of on the west side of the city, but I was privileged to carry in 2019 a bill to open up community paramedicine, and it's primarily been pilot projects done in rural settings, but I know the city of Fargo took that same model, and what the bill allowed is that EMTs could only handle cases where you were taking someone from a site of an emergency, an accident, to the hospital. And community paramedicine could put that group of EMTs into more of a preventive role. And City of Fargo has deployed that tool and saved, I think it's like $2 million or more than $2 million a year in terms of those that high number of EMT emergency calls by putting people in to the frequent fires and the people who are often calling with slipping on rugs and things like that to go in and do some prevention, and it's just simple stuff. But I would encourage you to look at that as one of the tools as well.
Thank you for your work, and I don't know, Chief, you have, okay, if you could, and before the Chief takes over, part of what will take time, right? We've just begun really trying to understand some of our peer communities. We don't want to overstate them because we are Billings, each community is unique, but often there's things we can learn from other communities. So this is not the only area that we're looking at, the Fargos and the Sioux Fallses and the Bends and the Fort Collinses, because we are, and it is one of the realities in Montana, the truth is we really don't have any peers in Montana. Right, so we're in Montana, so we're compared to Montana cities. So yeah, Great Falls, Missoula, they're on the list, they're close. But nobody else has got 150,000 people every day at noon doing business, commuting, and transporting in Montana. So some of what we're trying to do is get best practices from those other communities like you're talking about.
I guess I'd like just to add a little bit to that. Under Bruce McCandless's watch, we were able to create, and it was approved by City Council, a Paramedic Program, which is a life-saving program of which we have of late in the first quarter had several saves. And we're very proud of that. Thank you, Bruce. I know you're in the audience. I'm not trying to put you in the spot, but thank you very much. We have shown that we have saved lives, and people are up and walking when otherwise they wouldn't have been, and we are assured of that. We appreciate that. There are so many models out there that we have been investigating over the last couple of years of what we call, the units that we can actually put out there with an EMT to handle the lower acuity type calls. There are so many programs out there that we look at, we model, how can we deal with it? Again, it comes back to, with the staffing we have, our number one priority is we have to put 3 firefighters on every fire unit, and we're not flush with folks with our firefighters. And this is the true story. If you look at our fire stations, to keep a fire station operating, you need a fire truck, you need a minimum of 3 firefighters. As you saw in the presentation, they're recommending 4. We operate in Billings very lean at 3. So we don't have the staffing to be able to try some of these experimental models that we found that other cities, such as Spokane even, have found great success in, and being able to send less resources, smaller resources to certain lower acuity calls. These are things we would absolutely love to be able to do, but our number one priority is to be able to staff our fire engines that we currently have in the fire stations that we currently have, so that we can make sure that we don't reduce our level of service or response times. I hope that helps answer the question.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
So in respecting time, we've hit 1 o'clock. However, we've all still got a little bit of time, but I want to respect your time. Anyone who has to slide out, do that. But if you've got some more questions, yes, sir. Yeah, I'm sorry, up front here. I'm sorry, I don't know where my mic.
Alan Lohoff. I wanted to ask actually City Attorney Brooks a quick question. It's going to sound a little technical. One of the things that I'm looking at is the revenue side of this, because as a property owner in Billings, I have the honor of paying for all of the city services, all of the school services. And I'm happy to do that because this is my community and I know that investment is important. Other communities like Red Lodge and West Yellowstone are able to access the resort tax code within the state of Montana, which allows us, those cities, to gain revenue from the people who do not live within the city limits of Billings, yet come here every day to work, play, tour, etc., etc. The requirements in that code that prohibit us from doing it is a population cap, and if I read it right, a designation by the state that we are a resort community. Every session, it seems to come through the state to change that or allow us to vote ourselves for our own resort tax, and it always gets shot down. With your knowledge of the Montana Code, is it possible for a voter initiative to change those aspects of that code? And if so, is that an organizational principle for the cities in Montana, if they choose to do so, to get that code changed so that we as citizens of Billings could vote our own resort tax so that we could start to earn some income from the thousands of people that come through this community but do not own property?
Brian, after you answer the initiative, I'd like to make a comment. There is an effort going on.
Thank you for the question, very good one. Yes, it is possible. It would have to be on a statewide basis. There is some statutes that talk about local governing bodies, including self-governing bodies, do not have the authority to impose a tax unless the legislature has enacted that. And there has been some attempts, as Dan Brooks from the Chamber will tell you, he's in the audience here, to modify the resort tax, if you will, to allow certain of the larger cities like Billings to take advantage of that, because you're absolutely right. There's a lot of people that use our facilities, our services, and they don't pay a penny. And that's also been the concept behind the local option sales tax. But yes, I believe it's around 7-5-135 in our Title VII Montana Code. We'll have a procedure for initiatives or referendums by citizens. And so the short answer is yes, that is a possibility, because citizens have the ability, as long as it's not illegal, to present their own potential legislation that turns into law. Now, some in the room will say, well, that's a rather simplistic explanation. That's true. There's more details to it than just that. But nevertheless, you're absolutely right, and that is a potential.
And the private sector has approached the public sector. There have been 2 conference calls, one just before the holidays and one yesterday, where there is some private sector investment in doing some polling in Montana. And I think I've been a part of discussions where people are challenging. I've talked about this for 20 plus years, being between the Flathead, the Gallatin, now here. We all deal with the same issue. Maybe the most exciting part of this conversation is being driven privately, not by the cities. And the conversation is legislators may never be able to make this decision. So if polling is strong enough, should an initiative process be the way in which Montana changes its tax code? Yes, sir.
My question is, does Billings have a neighborhood watch? And if they do, right, how effective is that?
Chief.
Sir, we have several neighborhood watches. They're very active. I don't have the total number. Easy to get signed up. We will get you everything that you need and help you do the training and coordinate. So, yes, we have plenty of them. They're very active and they're very effective. And I think not in any of the slides that we have here, but one of the statistics that jumps out to me, whether it's an annual report and a quarterly, which I just provided to the boss, the number 1 call or the number 1 incident that we had last quarter and for the whole year was what we call suspicious. And by far, it was the highest number of calls that we responded to. And what that tells me is that you, the citizens, are looking out for your neighbors and saying, something's not right here, and you're calling. Now, a lot of times may not turn into anything, but I don't care. We are far more formidable when 110,000 sets of eyes, give or take the one-eyed person, makes that phone call. It makes it pretty difficult to operate when you have people calling. And so it's a very, very effective tool, and we are very active with that. So if you're interested or you belong to one or you need to,
I watch my neighborhood. If my neighbor over there will tell you that.
Okay, well, so we know the fire department's all over your stuff. So, very good. So, very good. That answer your question?
And let me just emphasize, we've also, along the lines of your role, because as the chief said, we will never be able, nor would we want to put enough resources into having officers at every corner, at every activity. We need all 110,000 residents and all 150,000 regular attenders in Billings paying attention to what's going on in their community. We had a code enforcement issue over the holidays that, thanks to the neighbors, the property owner, the code enforcement team, and our law enforcement team, the situation, I hesitate to say was resolved because it'll be ongoing, but it has gone from, it could have been a disaster, it was a disaster in the short term, and it was headed for worse. It got the short-term fix. We're going to stay on top of it now, but it requires neighbors' help. It requires property owner cooperation and the team of people who are public servants who are working for you. Together, we're able to do such a better job than kind of individually. Yes, ma'am.
This is for the chief. I would like to know, as a member of this community, why I noticed the difference for being a person of color in how the police talk to me, and right next to me changed the tone when another person who is not of my same race talked to me, and we are reporting the same crime. It is very demeaning in how they talk to me and then how they respond. Is that a common thing?
No, it's not. And if you have an issue with any of our officers' demeanor, behavior, any sort of their performance, so we certainly have a complaint process to go through, and we look at that. Well, if you don't let us know that we're not doing things right, then we can't fix it. And I will stand by our internal process. It's very robust. We hold our officers accountable. In fact, we generate more complaints internally than the citizens do on our officers.
It's usually the women police.
Okay, well, like I said, if you give me some details, we'll certainly investigate that. But you know, that's not tolerated. We don't put up with that. I expect our officers to act professionally and with the highest level of integrity, regardless on what the situation is. So if that happened, I apologize, but if you want me to look into it, I need some details, please.
My intent here is to run to about 1:15, recognizing we're past. Do we have some more questions? I think about 5-6 minutes left. In the back of the room there.
I think the work you do is amazing. The skills that you bring, the analysis that you brought forward, and I think everyone in the city is grateful for it. And yes, if money wasn't an issue, we'd all want more. We'd all want more investment. We'd all want more public safety. The question is revenue and how we generate more revenue. So when we go into this public safety mill levy discussion, the thought that I have is how do we generate more revenue so you can share the costs? As a homeowner, I'm paying X amount of property taxes, but what is the city doing to attract more businesses, to pay better wages, to keep our property values high, to ensure that we have strong public safety funds? Just keep that in mind.
Thank you. And I see Steve Arviscow here, who's a critical part of the team in building our economy. I would say, you know, we didn't introduce it in that way at all, but a part of this dialogue is around the topic of enhancing our economy, right? Whether we want to argue about whether we're the least safe community in Montana or amongst our peers or we're in the bottom quarter or the top quarter, I don't want to have a conversation about which ranking we are other than to say we're a safe community because of the economic impact that it ultimately comes out of that. So Penny, I know you had a question or a comment that you wanted to make.
Yeah, thank you. So just wanted to, first of all, I heard Margie McDonald's here. How many other state legislators are in the room? Wow, that should be your first call. Also wanted to make sure everyone knows that these people enforce policy, they don't create policy. If you have a problem with policy, you need to speak to your city council member, your state legislator, and your federal representative. These people enforce policy, they don't create policy. So again, if you're angry about policy, come to us. Want to make sure you know that the public safety mill levy is a created policy. So again, if you want to see some type of policy occur, please contact your elected official. That is critically important. To address domestic violence is not about a broken home. That is about an act of violence against a victim, and a victim is never responsible for a broken home. That is an act of violence. To make sure that you understand those 800 new domestic violence crimes that we are facing in the city of Billings, the one city prosecutor we have that addresses those crimes is paid for through a grant from the Violence Against Women's Act. That act needs to be passed at a federal level. Again, that's paid for, that particular position is paid for through a federal grant. We have to renew that grant every year, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that correct? So understand that is a federal grant, and we need that grant to be able to pay for this particular crime that we're facing in our city. So please contact your federal congressional member and say, we need the Violence Against Women's Act passed at a federal level. 2 public safety districts. Jennifer, contact your personal city council members. They're the ones pushing for that. It is not myself or Denise. So contact, it was Dick Clark and Chris Friedel, but it's also Roy Neese who's pushing for that, as well as Frankie Wall. So contact your personal.
Not my first rodeo, Ben.
Yeah,
Not my first.
I know it. I personally agree with you. I do not believe that it should be nonprofit organizations double paying. I totally agree with that. I don't agree that nonprofit organizations are not having those conversations. I encourage all of you to get involved with Substance Abuse Connect Coalition, Community Innovations. Those nonprofit organizations are definitely having those conversations in our community and are working with everyone here. Jennifer, I agree with you, this is a public health issue that we all need to be involved with. And again, I want to remind you that the one state legislator that is here in this room is Senator Margie McDonald. Please thank your legislators that show up to learn about what happens in their community and remind them that they represent the city of Billings as well as their individual constituencies and not their own personal party. Thank you.
I think, Will, we are 1:15, so I can't thank you guys enough for your time. Any information you share, whether you, like you said, what you shared verbally, and if you want to email us or write anything on those sheets, it all is helping us ultimately develop the policy solution that will be adopted by the City Council, of which we'll bring to our voters here in 2020. Thank you.